Welcome everyone to day 51 of my 100-day project. Today is the first day of acrylic, so I'm going to be using acrylic paint for the next 10 days. And as has been the case when I have switched mediums in these past 50 days, it was a bit of not a learning curve per se, but it took a little bit to get some muscle memory into it. And it did feel a little bit different going from oil pastel to acrylic, and not in the way that it felt in my hand so much, but I missed the texture and I missed how it felt. Like there's a feeling, there's a squishiness when you put pressure on a hard surface with oil pastel that just feels really good. It's very tactile, and the feeling of a brush on a surface is very different. So that, I think, was the biggest transition for me today. Just getting used to how it felt again in my hand. My process stays the same. I kind of map out a face. I start with a lot of the shadows, get the form in there, and then sort of build up to the details. So my process really hasn't changed in any of these mediums for the most part. But what does change is how I get the values, how I get the texture, mixing colors, etc. So similar to oil paint, I did a lot of mixing this time, and I used a very limited palette. So I'm using Nova Color paints today, and I'm using hot pink, which is the color that I did on the underpainting in the background. I'm using Paynes gray. I'm using azo yellow medium, and I'm using quinacridone violet. So it's a primary palette in that I've got a yellow, the azo yellow medium. I've got a blue, which is the Paynes gray, is really a bluish, sort of dark gray, blackish color. I've got the Quin Violet and the Hot Pink, which are my reds. So those are the colors that I use today, in white, titanium white. So I'm using titanium white by American Journey. It's a really nice texture. It's kind of thick, but not super, super thick. So it's a nice mix to it. The hot pink is opaque, and the titanium white is opaque. The Quin Violet, the yellow, and the Paynes gray are all transparent. So you're going to see me do a lot of glazing here. You can see on the right-hand side of the face, I'm layering that Quin Violet over to build up shadows, and on the left, I'm layering that yellow. And you can still see the marks that were there from the Paynes gray when I did my sketch. You can still see the texture. Look at her neck. There's so much texture in there because it's transparent. And I really love that. I love how I can sneak up on a form. I can sneak up on a shape. I can sneak up on a value by layering those transparent colors and glazing over them. And then I can come back in with some opaque mixtures to block out things that I want to block out. And so the highlights that I'm putting on the cheeks here and under the eye have a little bit of titanium white in them with a little bit of that yellow. And I'm starting to kind of build up some of the opacity here. As I'm getting closer, I kind of know where the features are now, and I kind of know what I want to do. So I can start adding some of those opaques in. And this has kind of been my go-to when I'm not sure what I'm painting, or if I'm switching mediums. I usually go to a very limited palette, and then that just takes a lot of the guesswork out of it for me. I don't have to worry about a bunch of colors. I'm just gonna go and kind of stick with values and go from there. I'm also reacquainting myself with this paint. I did a painting recently, you may have seen in some of my videos. It's a woman with a very pink background, and I used a lot of Nova Color in that. And now that I think about it, I used a lot of Nova Color in another piece that's kind of this abstract figure with some flowers. I call it Midnight in the Garden. I used a lot of Nova color there. So every paint manufacturer is a little bit different, and you kind of need to learn how it feels, how it works with other paints, the opacity, the transparency, all of that. And I think that's part of the reason why I picked the Nova colors to kick off this acrylic series with, because I've been using them. So I'm kind of familiar with how they work. And they're very soft. So they're not fluid like a golden fluid acrylic, but they're also not super thick and heavy. Like golden heavy body can be pretty thick and heavy, and so can Liquitex. But the Nova is like this really nice middle ground. It's very creamy and soft, but it moves really well. You don't have to add a lot of water to it. And to get it to move, it doesn't thicken up on you, and you get beautiful glazes. So I really do enjoy that paint line. And yeah, if you want to check them out, it's just Nova. I think it's Nova. Is it novacolors.com? I'm not sure. But if you just search for Nova paint, you'll find it. And they only sell direct. So you go directly to them and you can get what you need. I'm not sponsored by them at all. I just really enjoy their paint. So there's that part. At this point, I am adjusting the features a little bit, checking my values. I'm really loving that bright orange that I created on the side of her nose and a little bit on her shadow under her nose there. And you saw me use the handle of my brush to check the eye level to see if my eyes are on the same level. That's a great trick. You don't need a ruler. Just use something straight like your brush handle, and that'll tell you whether or not they're in alignment. So I'm just sort of adjusting things here. Because of my limited palette, I wasn't sure what color to make her eyes, so I did do kind of a lavendery violet color. And then I go in there at the end and add a bit of a contrast. So I'm just building up the shape. And one of the things you'll notice when I work with acrylic, I did this with acrylic ink and watercolor as well, is I'll work on one part of the painting and then I'll move to another part while I'm letting that dry. So her eyes were funky for a long time because I was letting the whites of her eyes dry as I moved to other places that I wouldn't be mixing and muddying up my colors too much. I've got some pretty strong contrast in there in some of the highlights, but I kind of like that with the nose. It kind of gives a more abstract feel, which is kind of what I want to go for. I want it to look realistic. It looks like a person, but I want to keep it more on the abstract side than anything. So I like adding those little shapes, scratching in. I'm kind of digging the swirl on the nose. I dig the swirl on the cheek or the little heart on the cheek. I kind of like to add a little bit of that just to bring back some of that abstracted nature. And for the background, what I did is I took a little bit of the Payne's gray and I mixed it with yellow and some white. So I made a very neutrally green color. And that is light, so it's going to help her pop, but it's going to offset a lot of those violets in her skin tone and her hair. And I really love that green and pink together, and the green and violet together. I also started to layer in some of the flowers in her hair. So again, they're not done. I'm letting them dry. So while they're drying, I'm off to move onto her hair a little bit. And where the light might be coming from, I've got a little bit more of that green color. And then I'm coming in with more Payne's gray just to add a little bit of that highlight. And then I'm using the end of my brush to scratch into it. And I'm using a Princeton Catalyst poly-tip brush. And I really like these for acrylic. They're very stiff, so you will get some hard edges if you know what to look for there. But the ends of all of them come to a point, and so they're great for scratching into things. It works really, really well, so I love that. Center of the flowers, I'm using some of that green color that I used for the background, just a little bit darker, just to give it a little bit of interest. And I added a little bit of that green color into her eye, her focal point eye. And there she is. That's it for today. A good foray back into acrylic paint. I must say I am missing that texture of the oil pastel. So I'll have to go back and remind myself how to create those textures with acrylic. And sometimes they're not physical, meaning something you can touch, but sometimes it's just like scratching in to create those visible texture versus the physical. I hope you're doing well. Take care of you. I will see you in the next one. Thanks for joining me. Bye.